Hello, everyone's Forest Focus as Nottingham Forest head into 3 Premier League games against rivals in the race for the Champions League places. Can they get the points they need to secure a place at Europe's top table next season? We'll discuss that and more in the company of, first of all, the Guardian Football Weekly podcast reporter and Guardian paper reporter, I should say, John Brewin. John, good to have you with us. How are you doing?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to have you. Although I did think when I was putting the notes together for this, the last time I saw you at a Forest game was Newcastle when we
Yes,
lost.
you're
And I
winning
saw
at half
you.
time.
We
Yeah.
were. That was when I saw you. Then it all went wrong. And then I remember after a game at West Ham where we lost, you said that's the kind of performance that gets a manager the sack. And Steve Cooper was sacked about 2 weeks later. So you were right about that. But I'm not sure you're the best omen. But good to have you with us again.
Yeah, as I said, thanks for having me. I think last time I saw Forest, you're not going to enjoy this, was at Bournemouth. So, yeah. So yeah. So I may have a different view of Forest than yourselves. So let's see.
Let's see. BBC commentator and local football expert as a former Notts County commentator, but a friend to all the clubs locally. Charlie Slater, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. I'm just glad that the bearer of doom and the kiss of death is going to be very much placed on John's doorstep today after all of that introduction that you just gave him. It can't be me that's blamed now, it's all John.
Well, the first topic I wanted to discuss was about, are you a kind of on the Forest train, a Nuno believer? Because every time I listen to Football Weekly, John, Barry Glendenning or Max Rushton have to do a kind of a mea culpa. We said Forest were going to get relegated. I don't know what your thoughts at the start of the season were. Bearing in mind what you've seen of Forest on TV, I hope, and in person, are you all aboard to thinking that we're the real deal or not?
Well, I think I was on that podcast and probably agreed with them at the time, so I'm not going to absolve myself of making one of the worst predictions of all time. My worst prediction of all time, if we're talking East Midlands football, was that Jamie Vardy would never score another goal in the Premier League after he scored against Manchester United. So I am not the world's greatest predictor, but and actually, I'm not even sure how I came to that decision, because I saw Forest under under Nuno last season and was actually quite impressed. And he Cooper, it could be very chaotic when I came to think of it. And Nuno just restored belief. And I think one of the good things about Nuno is, rather than being just a manager, he's a politician, isn't he? And I think that he's done very well with the Forest fans. He speaks directly to the fans if you're in the post-match. And he obviously he's got that Zen calm, hasn't he? That sort of full Buddha look that he carries. And also, the truth of it, look at the players that Forest had put together. Okay, we maybe didn't know about Milenkovic or someone like that, but that's a good squad of players. When you compare it to some of the other squads constructed around the Premier League that for a lot more money, and you have to look at that and think that's if well, at the time it was described as madness, but maybe there was method in it, and I think those predictions were way off. But I think it's that element of chaos that Forest had carried the previous 2 seasons that maybe gave people that idea that things might go, that spin off the axle or whatever. But that hasn't been the case, and I think the reason for that is probably Nuno, but you've got to credit those around him as well.
It's interesting what John says there, Charlie, around chaos and things like that. We were talking before we started recording, you're heading to Leicester after this, who seem like they're in the depths of chaos. So I guess is that a big factor for you in what Forest have done, viewing not from afar, because you do a lot of the press conferences and the games, but seeing the wider Midlands football picture?
I think that Forest just refined their chaos over time. Initially, it was chaotic, and we don't need to go over old ground for the reasons why they had to sign as many players as they did, and didn't have to sign some of them. There were a few that were thrown in the mix there for giggles, but as they to go back to the summer's business, it was refined. It was nothing chaotic about what they did over the summer. Nikola Milenkovic was not a secret to Premier League sides. He's a guy that won the most aerial duels in Serie A last season. He had just been named the Serbian national team captain. He was Fiorentina's captain. Manchester United had a look at him a couple of years before him for one reason or another, thought that he wasn't for them, and Forest got a bargain. What did they spend? 10 million on the guy, and it might go up to 12, depending on bonuses and the structure of the contract. And I'm sure it will go up to 12 because of how well he's played. But he's proved the perfect partner for Murillo. And Murillo was one of those signings when the recruitment was a bit more busy, let's just call it. But no one's ever questioned the acquisition of Murillo. It's the same with no. This isn't a secret. All comes down to recruitment. At every single club, it comes down to recruitment. And Forest recruited a lot of players. And by the very virtue of that, some of those didn't work out. But as they've, been able to be in a position to buy more players, to acquire more assets, they've managed to refine exactly what they're after. Matt Sells was the thing that they were missing at the back. Throw in Milenkovic, maybe a little bit fortunate with Ola Aina turning into be the stud that he is, because again, he wasn't a secret. They've had the means to be able to recruit, mixed with, the refined approach to it. Whereas other clubs, as you mentioned, Leicester City, they don't have the means to be able to recruit. They've just not got the financial space within their PSR to allow them to do so at the moment. Whereas Forest got all of theirs sorted, took their punishment, and are now in a much better position for it.
I guess when you look at players like John, Sells, Aina, as Charlie mentions, even Chris Wood, they're not players that we would have expected to be here. I guess they've stepped up alongside the ones that maybe like Milenkovic, other clubs have swerved for whatever reason. I mean, I think Man United didn't think he was good enough on the ball and stuff like that, but it's a collective thing of players massively overachieving alongside some absolutely diamond recruitment as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is that there's some other players within the Forest squad that that they've had quality before, and I think Forest have benefited from Chelsea's profligacy in the market, haven't they? Hudson-Odoi, Aina as well. Players that are discarded that they've got talent. Anthony Elanga, a player I know well. I mean, I still don't know why Manchester United got rid of him, but he was regarded. I think it was I forget the guy's name. Ten Hag thought he wasn't good enough on the ball. Again, you seem to have these players that Morgan Gibbs-White, obviously paid a lot of money for him, but he was the ideal player for the team that they bought. And again, Charlie says it's recruitment, but a lot of these players, it wasn't that they were unknown talents; it was that the talent hadn't reached the top of maybe where they were supposed to be. And at that point, you have to trust the management and the coaching to do the job, because it isn't just recruitment; you've also got coaching. I think these days, because it's a more global market, recruitment is a bit more important, because it used to be that if you had a good manager, you get players to do what they wanted to do, you could get to a certain point. But now people are scouting the global market and bringing in better players and better players. You've got to keep up with that. Forest have kept up with that, and they've outperformed many clubs that would consider themselves bigger clubs than Forest, and that's why they're in the position that they're in.
Is the style of play as well, John, something that players have to buy into
Of course,
as well? And that's a big factor, because we do play this. I'll ask Charlie about it and say we do play a different way, but players have to buy into it, don't they, John?
Yeah, I mean, actually, let's take the example of Gibbs-White. He's a creative player. When he was at Wolves, when he was at that, that star of the England representative teams, you're looking at. You wouldn't expect a player like that to get through so much work, but he does, and he's almost ideal for the Forest system, because he is prepared to put in that work. He's prepared to work across the front. He's almost like a one-man press at times, isn't he? And that's the thing with the Nuno. One of the things about Forest is that they play a very different style to the fashionable style at the moment, which would be, at its apex, you've got Bournemouth. I know you don't want to mention Bournemouth again, but I'm going to have to. But, which is that fast-moving, high-press, high-risk football. The risk is dialed back under Nuno, but it can be effective if you've got two great central defenders, a very strong spine. You've got a centre-forward playing the season of his life. You've got a good goalkeeper. That's always going to be the basis of a good team. And Nuno's got that, and are well coached. Occasionally, it can come apart, as it did against Bournemouth, as it's done in just recently. But what you've got there is a team that's built to last. You can move players in and out of it. There's a system there. You've got those wingers coming in and out, and it's caught other teams that play that different style of football. I was at Brentford a few months ago, and Brentford, of course, another team hailed for that pressing game, that going at it. Forest just picked them off. Easy as you like. I say easy as you like. They withstood the storm, but they have the defensive capability to withstand the storm and then pick them off and won the game. And it's a different approach, and I think that's a reasonable part of Forest's success this season.
Do you like this style of play, Charlie? I guess that people, probably younger people than us, have grown up the last 10 years or so assuming that football has to be played the Pep way, the Klopp way, high press, high energy, as John says. We're doing it, sort of rolling it back a little bit. Do you welcome this kind of approach? There's 2 or 3 or 4 different ways to win a game?
Absolutely, because of course there is, and football goes in cycles. You've seen that with the re-emergence of the more traditional number 9, of which Chris Wood is a great example of that this season. The best example in the world is, well, Haaland or Kane or Lewandowski. You wouldn't put Isak in that group because he's a bit more dexterous than that. But I look at the way that Forest play, and of course there's more to it than this, but I think if you're preparing in the Premier League, let's say that 17 or 18 of the 20 teams play the quote unquote Pep way. And if you're preparing for the same style of football as an opponent manager that week, then surely you can drill into your players time after time after time that this is how we press when we do this, because we're coming up against the same thing every single week. But when you then throw a Nottingham Forest in the mix, who don't press, who sit in and say, well, go on then. And then we're going to, like Red Arrows, I've said a few times, they just flood forwards. And it all comes down to that quick early ball when they do recover possession near the edge of their own penalty area. Often it's like an Elliot Anderson who will find taking the ball on the half turn, an early ball to a Morgan Gibbs-White or an Elanga or a Hudson Odoi when available, and they're away. Now, that is a completely different style to what the vast majority of these players that they're having to play against are conditioned to playing against on a weekly basis. And so that's where I think it's a novelty factor from a Forest perspective that they're able to take advantage of this season, because they are offering something a little bit different to the other teams.
We shall get on to talking about the big question of whether they'll make it to the Champions League in just one second. But just a reminder and a word for the Trent navigation that Newcastle is the game on Sunday. Obviously, it's on TV, so you can watch it live at the Nav on the 2 big screens outdoors. You can also get the screen indoors. There's a pizza kitchen and 2 bars, so you shouldn't have to wait for too long. And if you get there early enough, you can get a Sunday lunch as well. So do get down the Nav to enjoy the game. And thanks for their support. Right, we've blown smoke up Forest collective arse for quite a while there, John. I suppose the big question is, will it get them over the finish line or not? Especially with 3 games against Newcastle, Arsenal and City to come, that's going to, tell us a little bit more about it, I think. Where do you see this ending up?
Yeah, those feel like 3 key fixtures, don't they? Listen, whatever happens now, it's been a good season for Forest, but you've got that idea that it could end in a certain amount of disappointment. Let's take those games piece by piece. Newcastle have had their own jolts. They've had their own positions of thinking they've got it cracked. They obviously won at the City ground. A game that I don't think they came away a little surprised they won that game, if I recall that correctly. First half, far better from Forest, and then 2 good goals in the second half, if that's my recollection of it. Then you've got City. Well, we don't know who Manchester City are these days, do we? It's possible that the team that we saw destroy Newcastle at the weekend are the new City, which is a worry that it's taken only 2 or 3 weeks, and then a transfer window. Nico Gonzalez is the new Rodri. You've got this Manouche, who looks pretty good, doesn't he? This is the thing that City can do, is pick up the most informed striker in Europe and just bring him in. You know, that's recruitment in its apex. And the other game was against Arsenal.
Arsenal at home.
Yeah, that's a midweek game, right? Yeah, yeah. That is a great fixture, isn't it? Because Arsenal have this fragility to them, but there's also a very that is going to be a physical game as well, isn't it? I mean, you've also got that idea that just thinking about it, going back to that Bournemouth game. I'm sorry about this. They've got those quick forwards. I think that was one game where Murillo and Milenkovic had a big problem, didn't they, against Bournemouth's quick forwards? Arsenal, by the fact they actually have no centre forward, are going to be using those very quick forwards. So you've got that. That's going to be something for Nuno to work on. Listen, if Forest get through that, picking up 4 to 6 points, then you've got to say that they're definitely in the hunt. Of course, they're in the hunt. You're also looking at what's coming up behind. Chelsea are in all types of mess now. Things are draining very quickly. Maresca's popularity ratings are dropping. He had one idea. It worked for a while. It stopped working now. And then you've got the dreaded Bournemouth, who are on the crest of a wave. They play Wolves at the weekend, a game that you'd expect them to win. I don't see there's that many threats to the top 5, and we are looking at the top 5 now. If you look at the performances of Serie A teams in the Champions League this week, then, Forest have a good chance. They shouldn't just be aiming for 5th. They're in 3rd at the moment, but it's possible. And, and I also think in these times of, City, the elite, all rowing, all these, for England's representative to be Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth in the Champions League would be rather good. And I think that's what the people beyond those big clubs will be hoping for. Because who are the other teams that should be involved? Manchester United and Spurs. Well, they're both a pair of joke clubs, aren't they? So let's share the wealth. And I don't think Chelsea have done enough to be there. So why not Forest? Why not?
I think it's interesting, Charlie, there listening to John when he talks about the teams around us. And maybe this is the haze of history, remembering games 10 years ago. But it felt like the top 4 was so set. Like it was always Arsenal, United, Liverpool, Chelsea, and then City came up more recently. But all those teams were massive. They were all so well functioning. Obviously, I suppose the interesting factor is it doesn't feel like they're all well functioning this season at the top. And that makes these next 3 games to me more exciting and winnable than they might have been, as tough as they're going to be. Is that fair or not?
Yeah, it's good for the game, isn't it? It's good for the league to have clubs like Bournemouth and Forest crashing the so-called, it became the Big 6 in the end, didn't it? But as 2 of them are currently languishing in the lower parts of mid-table, you're not sure that really stands anymore. It can only be a good thing. And as John said, almost no matter what happens now, it's a good season for Forest. Even if they were to drop down to, and this is crazy, right? But even if they and I don't think they will, but even if they were to finish 8th or 9th and not get European football next season, now the initial response would be, oh my goodness, what a collapse, awful, typical Forest or whatever. But you'd have to try and fight the urge, because anyone would have bitten the handoff for 8th or 9th. And again, I don't think Forest will drop that low. I do think Forest will finish in Europe this season. Will it be the Champions League? I don't know if it will be the Champions League. I got a funny feeling after City spent all that money that they're going to finish this season a whole lot stronger than what they have been throughout the rest of it. Arsenal are obviously going to be there or thereabouts. Liverpool are almost obviously going to win the thing. As John pointed out, Chelsea aren't the force that they were. And when Maresca, I dealt with Enzo Maresca quite a bit when he was the Leicester City manager. When the going's good, it is really good. But when it isn't, it's quite equally as bad. And I always am wary of a manager who says when the going is good, they go, oh yeah, but we're not going to challenge. Remember, his whole thing was Don't worry, there are bad times coming. He used to say it. Don't, no. Yeah, I know it's great right now, but there are bad times coming. He's always known that they were going to hit the skids at some point, and they have hit them of late. You know, Cole Palmer was magnificent. He is magnificent, but he can't do it all. And they are missing that recognised number 9 now that Jackson's out injured, and and Kunku's struggling to play there, and obviously Cole Palmer's not that out and out number 9. I think Forest have still got a great shot at, as John pointed out, top 5, which will all but certainly mean a Champions League space next season for the football club. And I remember that night earlier on in this season when Aston Villa hosted Bayern Munich in their return to European Cup football after all those years away. And what a noise it was at Villa Park that night. Can you imagine what the noise would be at the City Ground were Forest to do it? And look, obviously all Forest fans want Champions League football, but even if they had to settle for the Conference League, it would still be a magnificent achievement this season.
The thing with the Conference League is you'd fancy Forest had a decent chance of winning that, wouldn't you? I mean, if they could maybe strengthen the squad a little bit, but I mean, Chelsea have made short work of that competition so far. We'll have to see how far they get. And I mean, West Ham won it a couple of years ago. Listen, it's a trophy that Forest could win. The Champions League would be so much fun, wouldn't it? I mean, you obviously Nottingham Forest, Real Madrid. I mean, that's the stuff of dreams, isn't it? But I mean, I don't know. One of the problems, of course, is if a team gets into Europe, it does tend to drag down their Premier League performance the next season, and that will be a concern. But hey, no one's gonna stop you dreaming, are they? That's the thing about European football, because Forest remains to those of us of a certain age about European football, because that's where their greatest days came.
Yeah, they would have to they would have to spend big, because as you rightly point out, Villa this season have struggled. I think to this point, on the second week of a Champions, because they played the Champions League fixtures on 2 weeks in a row type thing. They have not won a Premier League, or at least this was the stat for a while. They've not won the following Premier League game after that, and it's not because they weren't playing European football last season. They were playing European football last season as well, but the demands physically, emotionally on the players to play a Champions League game are so much greater. And so they would have to invest massively. But on the plus side, usually Champions League revenue amounts to an extra 150 million quid in revenue for a football club like Nottingham Forest. So there would be the money there, and so the wiggle room as well within PSR to reinvest in the squad again.
I mean, I think like Liverpool, Arsenal, City feel kind of baked into the top 3, and then us, Newcastle, and Bournemouth are probably the other ones. Chelsea do feel like they're wobbling. I mean, it is a bit mad, John, that it's us and Bournemouth have spoken as serious contenders. Are we seeing kind of a realignment of the Premier League where United and Spurs are going to take years to rebuild, or is that wishful thinking on my part and money will just talk in the end?
Well, I think you could probably take the two different clubs. Spurs could probably realign themselves if they actually spent the spare money they've got. PSR, I think January they had a capability of spending 280 million. Obviously, Daniel chose not to spend that much of it. And Manchester United, well, that may well be a car crash waiting to happen. That's the thing, because it's.
What do you mean waiting to happen?
Well, I mean, like an even worse one. Yeah. Like, there is a more, that they sack this manager and they move on to the next disaster, and you've got a club that's down at the bottom, that is suffering something similar to like what a Villa went through, or an Everton, because they have spent up. The Glazers have sucked it dry now, and big Sir Jim Ratcliffe, it appears, has only just found this out and is having to deal his way out of it. Having said that, you can't rule out the fact that there's a possibility that Amorim might actually know what he's doing, and then next season they're a much better team because he has a summer to work with them. They probably won't have European football, in which case he's got the weeks to work with them, and then the team becomes better. or something like that. Again, but that appears unlikely. With Spurs, you do wonder who the manager will be next season. So yeah, those two clubs, they're never going to be away for too long because of the finances, particularly Spurs these days. But yeah, there is a gap here, and I think PSR, something that Forest fans know all too well about, has actually. Well, Forest have played the PSR system better than most, haven't they? They've had their run-ins with it. They've pushed it to the limit, you might say, but that has resulted in a strong squad and the correct choice of manager for that squad. Nuno and someone who knows that system, who knows that transfer system well, having been at Wolves, Nuno knows how that you will have players coming in and out. Very Portuguese system, and I think this is part of it. Nuno was a choice that most of us, I think I'm talking to you back then, was maybe third or fourth on the list behind your Lopeteguis and all this type of thing, but such a wise choice, and whoever made it deserves such credit, really.
Why do you think he was third or fourth on the choice? He was like 10th on the choice for Spurs. Is it because he's a bit like this Zen Buddha type guy and not like a media star that sometimes does push you up the pecking order?
I think it's a football, just to be quite honest with you. I think, but you say that and think that Wolves actually played some pretty decent stuff under him. I think it's maybe that towards the end, maybe that 18 months towards the end of his time at Wolves, it became very boring. And yeah, he is not a guy that sells himself in a way that certain managers do. He's not a media darling, but actually, funny enough, I think he's very good with the media. He plays them very well, and without being glib, he's able to say, "We've got to the next game. We'll see what happens next time." That appears to be one of his catchphrases. When they lose, let's go on to the next one and see what happens next. And you can actually say it's actually very sensible. And not every manager can be that. Can be Bill Shankly. That's the thing. It's got to suit the club. And what did Forest need at the time? Well, Steve Cooper wasn't able to calm it down. Well, Nuno has managed to do that, and with that, it's progressed into good business, far more careful management, and you are where you are, not by accident, I wouldn't say. The one thing is that all managers have a shelf life, and they make them a point when fans begin to think, can we play a bit more expansively? Should we be winning more games? The point is, next season, other managers will have a scouting plan for Forest, so they'll know how to play against them. That's when managers start to get into trouble, because it stands to reason. There's only a few ways that you're going to have to play the game. Not everyone can recreate themselves in the style of an Alex Ferguson. It's probably not possible in the modern game, to be quite honest. Or Guardiola does recreate himself, but it's to a certain model. And even he's gone long ball now. So, maybe if long ball is the way to go, Forest are, with respect to that long ball football, the model that a few will follow. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean, I remember listening to John there, Charlie, racing about Wolves. Like a lot of my friends are Wolves fans from where I grew up, and they did get bored of the football. The other thing that happened at Wolves was they sold a lot of his best players from under him, like Diogo Jota and guys like that. But with our owner, I mean, I think he'd reinvest in the team more than Fossland would. So one of the questions I was going to ask from reading social media is, people have been saying, this is Forest's one chance to get in the Champions League. We'll never be here again. Do you think this is a one-season flash in the pan, or can we compete, at least in the top half, consistently, do you think, or not?
I went away with Forest on pre-season back in July, and the thing that I'd said it at the time on the telly, I said there's a quiet confidence here that they feel like they can surprise a few people this season. And by surprise, I meant like 10th, 12th. I didn't mean third. So this has exceeded everybody's expectations, I think. But that's not to say that it's about continuing to develop, isn't it? And it was Brendan Rodgers that used to say this when he was at Leicester City. He used to say that one of two things needs to happen after 3 or 4 years at a football club when the manager has been there for that amount of time. And look, Nuno's only been at the club for just over a year, but Brendan Rodgers used to say, unless you're Pep or Sir Alex Ferguson, or Arsene Wenger perhaps to that extent as well, you need a change after 3 or 4 years. Either the message needs to change, as in the manager needs to change, or you need to completely refresh the squad to ensure that it's not falling on deaf ears anymore. And so down the line, that might be something that Forest look at. Maybe that's what Nuno ran into at Wolves a few years ago. But I look at the job that he's done this season and think, with the ambitions that football club has, why can't they continue to build and to at least sustain the sort of football that they have put in place this year? When Evangelos Marinakis first bought the club, I was one of 3 or 4 journalists that got taken over to Athens, and we were shown around. And when we were it was weirdly open, like it was very access all areas, to the point that Sabri Lamouchi had just taken charge as Forest head coach. And the guy who was showing us around from Olympiakos was like their director of communications, and he just took us through the canteen while Lamouchi and his staff were eating breakfast. They were staying at the training ground at the time, Olympiakos' training ground, and I remember the look on Lamouchi's face, like, who on earth are these people, and why have they got cameras at our breakfast table, that type of thing. It was very, very open, but we turned one corner and there was Christian Carambo. Of course, a legendary footballer that works as part of the Marinakis empire. And he said at the time, on record, on camera, he said, the ambitions that they have for this football club, for Nottingham Forest, far outweigh that of the ambitions that they have for Olympiakos. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't say it because, it's bigger than me, but I remember thinking, yeah, right. This is his boyhood club, Olympiakos. Why would he then put more money and more? But the rewards are bigger. And maybe he's been proven right in what Carambo was saying at that point. And that was a good few years ago now. It's before COVID and all that sort of stuff. And perhaps he was right that the ambitions for the Marinakis empire involving Nottingham Forest are the highest that they have anywhere, including at Olympiakos. And obviously they've got a couple of other clubs, or one other club and one that they're working on as well. So, I expect them to continue to try and build.
Well, Olympiacos won the Conference League, didn't they? So I mean, it's the overall empire is going well at the moment, isn't it? But I think you find with these multi-club ownerships, it's always the Premier League that's the real key of it, isn't it? Because it's it's where the money is, to be frank, and it's the global thing as well. Obviously, look at the City Football Group. You look at that strange thing they had going at Watford, where they owned Granada, and they've also got what's the Italian club? Udinese. Yeah, and it's the Premier League's where it's at, and you can. But obviously, through Olympiacos, Marinakis was well connected coming in. He wasn't a big Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who, I mean, has had some involvement in football before, but not. He wasn't new to the game. He knew he knew the agents to speak to. I think we know who we're talking about there. And if you get the right players through those connections, then you can make it work. And obviously, the guy connected to that agent is Nuno, which is why one of the reasons you've got him. But he's done a good job on those clubs that are a rebuild, as Wolves was. Forest have followed and actually, outperformed them really in the end.
There is one more topic I want to ask the chaps about, but just before we do that, a quick word for Vesta Blinds. If you're in the East Midlands and not in a broom cupboard like Charlie, which looks like more like a prison cell, then do consider getting made-to-measure blinds or shutters from Vesta Blinds. The link's in the description, but it's vestablinds.com if you're interested. Are there any windows where you are, Charlie?
There are. I'm in an office. There's a window just behind, my camera. I've got a wonderful view of London Road in the middle of Nottingham.
Lovely.
And if I, could move the Premier Inn out of the way, I might even be able to see the floodlights of Meadow Lane, that City Ground, and Trent Bridge.
What
but
more
otherwise,
could a
no,
man want?
it's a firmly soulless place. But I do have the stationery cupboard behind me. So if anybody's in need of a pen,
Excellent. If you need a pen, get down to BBC East Midlands. Right. That's something I wanted to ask John and Charlie about just quickly in the next 5 minutes, because an England squad coming up. John, I assume Gibbs-White's going to be in it. There's an argument as to whether he shoehorns away into an 11 even now. Probably not. What about Elliot Anderson as well? What are your thoughts on those two?
Well, Gibbs-White definitely deserves a turn. Anderson, why not? We're in this. I was writing a thing about this yesterday. Just how much football has Thomas Tuchel seen? This appears to be this topic at the moment. He's been accused of working from home, that great crime of our times.
Hang on, where are you two working today?
I'm sat on my sofa, Charlie. I'll be off to Villa Park later, so I will be going to somewhere. Unlike Thomas Tuchel, will Thomas Tuchel be at Villa Liverpool? Let's see. After the broadside sent across him by a certain leading Fleet Street newspaper, we'll see. But Elliot Anderson's an interesting one, isn't he? That'd be interesting of how deep Thomas Tuchel is prepared to go when he's naming that England squad, because every England manager, there's a couple of wild cards in there, or you get them where it's quite orthodox. I remember Fabio Capello wasn't particularly, it didn't go particularly deep, or there weren't many deep cuts at the time. But who was the one? Gareth Southgate placed great. What's his name? Guy that's at Ipswich now was at City, midfielder. Calvin Phillips, that type of player. It depends what type of football Thomas Tuchel wants to play. That systems football. Does Elliot Anderson fit into that system? Gibbs-White, he suggests, probably does fit into that, which is slightly defensive, not actually that different to Nuno's style of play, actually. If you remember the Tuchel plan that we got success with Chelsea. So there's a couple of Forest players that could fit quite well into that, you'd have to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's Hudson-Odoi if he's fit as well, but he's not quite at the moment. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, Charlie, if the wild card's more likely to be from a Big Six club like a Wanyeri out of nowhere, or a Spence, or someone like that. But Elliot Anderson was in my England squad 2 squads ago, but I'm very biased. Where do you think these Forest lads stand?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Morgan Gibbs-White in there. I would be more surprised to see Elliot Anderson in there, and that's not to take anything away from the job that Anderson has done this season. You got to remember, he's still a young man as well. He's 21 years old. He moved away from his boyhood club. I mean, yeah, he'd been on loan at Bristol Rovers earlier on in his career, but otherwise he'd never really left that Goldfish Bowl, as it's known, of the Northeast. And so he's done really well to settle in the way that he has done. And as I said before, I think he's a crucial part in the way that Nuno plays. As John said, it's just whether or not Tuchel thinks that he can be a crucial part of the way that his England is going to play. And there are so many uncertainties because he's new to the gig that it's almost impossible to say yes, he'll be in, or no, he won't be, because he is one of and there's probably 10 of them in the Premier League who are unknowns in this department, Elliot Anderson being one who is up for consideration.
And there's been an awful lot of players in, just over that point after Christmas that have come through that are suddenly starring in that way. And you mentioned 2 of them there, the Forest players, but that Arsenal pairing, Wanyeri, Miles Lewis Skelly. I mean, these are very, very young players that previously would be, under 21s or whatever. It's whether Tuchel, who is a reasonably conservative manager, you'd have to say, he's not. Whether he does go for that flush of youth, or when you consider what went wrong with Southgate, I say went wrong. They only lost in the final, but it was considered a great disaster by certain people, wasn't it? That he tried to cram too much talent in there. And one player, we've mentioned him earlier. What do England do with Cole Palmer? That's the. Because does Cole Palmer become a Letizia, a Tony Curry, a Rodney Marsh, or sort of that player that is almost too good, too creative for an England team? It's that type of thing, because Tuchel is a systems guy, And do we have free spirits? One thing about Gibbs-White has shown, he's very good at playing within his system and doing what his manager asked him to do. And I think that probably puts him in good stead.
Yeah, I think so.
I wonder if he could drop a bit deeper as well, Gibbs-White, if he had to, because that the area of the number 10 position is so incredibly crowded, and
of course,
but I just wonder whether or not, because he's got that bite to him, Gibbs-White, he's got a great engine. I just wonder whether or not he could drop a little bit deeper into an England system and provide the kind of the mobility, the engine, the bite that you need in the midfield in international football, combined with his ability to be able to pick a pass and dribble and drive a team forward as well. I wonder if he could fit in there.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying Gibbs-White played in a similar position in the Brentford game that I saw.
Yeah, he's played a central midfield role.
It was excellent. It was excellent. Yeah. And Nuno said, well, this is described as an experienced player, which he is. Obviously, he's played an awful lot of football for someone of his age, and said, this guy can play any position, and he was hugely impressive in that game. Brentford have a midfield, but it can be open, and that's he's a possibility to play in that position. He's got a good chance because as he's there's a big variety to his play, isn't there? One of the worst things, of course, that could happen to him is, as happens so often to England talented players, is we'll just whack him on the left because we haven't got anyone else to play there. The Foden Scholes thing. Let's hope that doesn't happen to him, because that's often the death of people's England's career, isn't it? And it's a shame when that happens. But he deserves his chance, and I'd hope that because Tuchel's on that. Well, he's only got 18 months. There isn't much time for experimentation. That's one thing we do need to bear in mind. So if you've been selected now, you're probably with a good chance of being there or thereabouts for the World Cup next year. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I think you're right. Right. We shall leave it there. If you have enjoyed this, do us a favor, hit like, hit subscribe. Do consider channel membership or Patreon, or just give us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify if you would. We'll end it there because Charlie has got to go for another nail in the Van Nistelrooy coffin very shortly. And John is you're off to Villa Park, aren't you?
I am, yes. Yeah. A night of the road. Yeah. See you at Toddington Services. So yeah.
How many layers tonight? I used to hate January football.
Oh God. I'm just weighing that up. I've got 2 on now. 2, 3. I think it's a 5. It's a 5. Could go, Charlie, could go 6.
What about you? Were you at Leeds the other night, Charlie?
I was at Leeds on Monday night, and it was Baltic. I knew it was going to be cold, but I did an FA Cup game in the third round in January at Bramall Lane when Sheffield United played Cardiff on a Thursday night. There was only 6,000 people there. One of the reasons was because they'd moved an FA Cup game to a Thursday night. The other reason was because it was -5 at kickoff.
Oh.
So I'm all about the heated gilet. The heated gilet.
I've got one. Yeah.
Battery pack in the pocket. Away you go. Makes all the difference.
There you go. Tricks of the trade there to end on the football media coverage. I must admit, I don't miss it doing games. I'm quite happy watching on my sofa at home these days. But yes, thank you very much for the chat. We shall be back tomorrow with a preview of the Newcastle game, then Friday with an opposition preview, and then back on Sunday with a post-match show, having watched it on the warm on the sofa, this one. So yeah, thanks to John. Do check out Guardian Football Weekly and his work in the Guardian. Thanks to Charlie. Just turn on a radio and you'll find him somewhere, whether it's BBC Radio, TalkSport, Sky Sports, wherever you should find it. Actually, you're not on TalkSport, are you? Just on BBC and a bit of Sky.
5 Live, bit of Sky Sports. Yeah, anyone will pay me.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Right. Thanks very much for the chat. Have a good day, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.